The flashbulbs were a blinding assault, a predatory storm of light that turned the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel into a stage. This was the night of the Sterling Vance Foundation Gala, the absolute pinnacle of New York's philanthropic calendar. At the center of it all was Alistair Vance, CEO of Sterling Vance Global, a man who commanded the room with the casual arrogance of a modern emperor. And beside him, visibly pregnant and clinging to his arm, was his wife, Eleonora. Tonight, in front of everyone, he would not just drop her. He would shatter her. This single act of public humiliation was meant to be her end. He never imagined it would be the beginning of his. The air in the ballroom was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and $1,000 orchids. Men in bespoke tuxedos, like a flock of sleek penguins, navigated a sea of women draped in couture. This was Alistair Vance's world. Eleonora Hayes was just living in it, or so he constantly reminded her. Alistair, tall and impeccably dressed by a tailor on Savile Row, clinked his glass with a senator, his laugh booming with manufactured confidence. His eyes, the color of cold steel, scanned the room, counting the influence, the power, the money. He was the CEO of Sterling Vance Global, a multi-billion-dollar logistics empire that had its tentacles in every port on the continent. Eleonora stood slightly behind him, a habit she had developed to make herself smaller. Her dress, a modest navy silk designed to accommodate her 6-month pregnancy, felt like a costume. She was an intelligent woman, a Vassar graduate with a degree in art history. But in Alistair's world, her intellect was an inconvenient, unmarketable accessory. He had married her for her name, Hayes, an old money name that gave his new money hustle a veneer of respectability. He had assumed, incorrectly, that the name was all she had. Alistair, darling. A woman with a face pulled taut by surgery, perhaps a Mrs. Vanderbilt of the modern age, air-kissed him. You've done it again. This gala is the talk of the town. Alistair beamed, placing a possessive hand on the small of Eleonora's back. We do our best, Cynthia. It's all about giving back, isn't it? He squeezed Eleonora's waist, a gesture that looked affectionate, but was, in reality, a warning. Stand straight. Smile. Don't speak. The main event of the evening was Alistair's speech. He was announcing a new, massive donation to the city's opera. He was at the podium, the applause thundering. Eleonora sat at the head table, right in his line of sight, next to Robert Denton, Alistair's COO and chief sycophant. And it is with great pride, Alistair was saying, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity, that we announce the Sterling Vance Initiative. He paused, reaching into his breast pocket for his speech cards. He fumbled. He checked his other pocket. A flicker of panic crossed his face. He looked down at Eleonora, his smile tightening into a grimace. She had been in charge of his speech cards. She had them in her small clutch. She realized his mistake and, trying to be discreet, began to stand up to hand them to him. But Alistair saw his moment. He was already under pressure from the board about a bad investment in Singapore, and he needed a scapegoat for his momentary lapse. He held up a hand, stopping her. Please, Eleonora, sit down, he said into the microphone. The room, which had been buzzing with whispers, fell dead silent. My wife, he continued with a short, cruel laugh, seems to be a bit overwhelmed. It appears she has misplaced my notes. Then again, she misplaces her keys 3 times a week. Laughter, uncertain at first, then sycophantic, rippled through the front tables. Eleonora froze, her hand still holding the clutch containing his cards. It's just... Alistair sighed, feigning exasperation. You try to give them one simple task. He then looked directly at her, his voice dripping with condescension. Perhaps the pregnancy brain is setting in early. Or perhaps, my dear, you simply aren't cut out for this level of responsibility. It's all right. He waved a dismissive hand. Don't trouble your pretty, empty head about it. I'll just have to wing it. He didn't just insult her. He neutered her. He painted her as an incompetent, decorative, and stupid child. The public humiliation was total. He had branded her as useless. Eleonora did not flinch. She did not cry. She simply lowered her hand, her eyes locking onto his. She sat back down, her posture perfectly straight. The room watched her, expecting tears. They saw nothing. They saw a porcelain doll, serene and empty. Alistair, basking in the perceived recovery, launched into his speech, his charisma winning back the crowd. But he had missed the change. He hadn't seen the ice form in his wife's eyes. He hadn't registered that the woman he had just publicly executed was not the woman who would be riding home with him. He had broken the gilded cage, and he had no idea what he had just unleashed. The applause for his speech was deafening. As he returned to the table, basking in the glow, Robert Denton slapped him on the back. "Brilliant recovery, Alistair. Handled it like a pro." Alistair leaned down to Eleonora, his breath hot on her ear. "See? That's how it's done. Try to keep up." Eleonora simply turned her head, picked up her water glass, and took a long, slow sip. The first battle had been lost, but the war, a war Alistair didn't even know was being waged, had just been declared. The ride home to their Park Avenue penthouse was a study in oppressive silence. The Rolls-Royce Phantom glided through the sleeping city, its interior insulated from the world, creating a vacuum that amplified the tension. Alistair was scrolling through his phone, a smug half-smile on his face as he read the early press coverage of the gala. "Good coverage," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "They're calling the initiative bold." They loved it. Eleonora stared out the window, watching the blur of streetlights paint fleeting stripes across her silk dress. She had not spoken a single word since the podium. Alistair finally seemed to notice her silence. He sighed, the sound of a man deeply inconvenienced. "Oh, come on, Eleonora. Don't sulk. It was a minor gaffe. You embarrassed me by not having the cards ready, and I covered for us. You need to develop a thicker skin if you're going to be Mrs. Vance." Eleonora turned her head slowly, her expression unreadable in the dark. "You didn't cover for us, Alistair. You filleted me. You used me as a prop to make yourself look charmingly beset by an incompetent wife." Alistair actually scoffed. "Filleted? Don't be so dramatic. It was a joke. People laughed. It's over. Honestly, this sensitivity is exhausting, especially now." He gestured vaguely toward her stomach. "You're carrying my son. My heir. All you have to do is look good and not mess things up. You failed at the not messing things up part tonight. I corrected the error. End of story." The car pulled into the private underground garage. The doorman rushed to open Alistair's door. Alistair got out without a backward glance, assuming she would follow. She did. She followed him into the private elevator. She followed him into the sprawling, cold, marble-floored penthouse. The entire apartment was decorated in shades of grey and black, a mausoleum of modern taste. Alistair loosened his bow tie, tossing his tuxedo jacket over $1 million Art Deco chair. "I'm going to have a scotch in the study. I've got a call with the Hong Kong office. Don't wait up." He disappeared down the hall, already forgetting her existence. His dismissal was as complete as his public humiliation of her had been. Eleonora walked into their master suite. It was vast, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. She stood in front of a full-length mirror, looking at her reflection. She saw the woman Alistair saw, the pregnant wife, the pretty accessory, the holder of a defunct, respectable name. She touched her stomach. "He thinks we're his property," she whispered to the child within. "He thinks we are just an extension of his ego. He thinks that name, Hayes, is just a bronze plaque on his shiny new building." She watched her own eyes in the mirror. The humiliation had burned away the fog of her marriage. For 2 years, she had tried to be the woman he wanted, the quiet, supportive wife. She had believed his narrative, that her family's legacy was long dead, that she was lucky he had rescued her from a life of quiet, faded obscurity. Alistair had made one fatal miscalculation. He assumed the Hayes family power was just in the name. He had never bothered to read the fine print. Eleonora walked to her bedside table and picked up her phone. She bypassed her usual contacts and scrolled to a number she had not dialed in over a year. She pressed the call button. It rang 3 times. A dry, precise voice answered, despite the late hour. "Yes?" "Gregory," Eleonora said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "It's Eleonora Hayes." She never used her married name with him. There was a pause on the other end. "Ms. Hayes, I have been wondering when I might hear from you. Is everything all right?" "No," Eleonora said. "It is not. But it's about to be." "I see," said Gregory Taft, the sole executor of her father's estate and the man who had managed the Hayes family trust for 3 decades. "He did it, Gregory," Eleonora said, walking to the window and looking down at the city lights. Tonight, at the foundation gala, he invoked the public disparagement clause, the moral negligence article, Article 7, Section 4. Gregory Taft drew a sharp, quiet breath. He did it publicly, in front of witnesses, in front of 300 of New York's most powerful people, and the press. He called me incompetent, useless, and an empty-headed burden. I believe the exact phrase was pretty empty head. "My God," Gregory whispered. "The fool, the arrogant fool. Your father always said, 'I know what my father said,'" Eleonora interrupted, her voice hardening. "And he was right. I was foolish to hope. But I'm not foolish anymore. I want you to execute the transfer." "Eleonora, you understand what this means," Gregory said, his lawyerly caution kicking in. "Once this is done, there is no going back. The dissolution of the primary trust is immediate. The voting shares transfer from the trust directly to me. All 51% of Sterling Vance Global. I am aware." "Alistair Vance will be displeased," Gregory said, in the understatement of the century. "Alistair Vance," Eleonora said, placing a protective hand on her stomach, "publicly insulted his pregnant wife. Now she is going to become the new chairwoman of his company. I want you to call an emergency board meeting for 9 a.m. Monday. Cite shareholder prerogative. And Gregory? Yes, Ms. Hayes? Have a locksmith and a security team meet me at the Sterling Vance building. I'll be there at 8 a.m. to collect my husband's things." To understand the earthquake Eleonora was about to trigger, one had to understand the history of Sterling Vance Global. The company's glossy marketing materials, all approved by Alistair, told a simple story. Alistair's father, Thomas Vance, and his partner, Arthur Hayes, built a small shipping company. Thomas, the visionary, turned it into a global powerhouse, while Arthur, a quiet academic, faded into the background. When Thomas died, Alistair, a prodigy, took over and led it to unprecedented glory. This narrative was a lie. Arthur Hayes, Eleonora's father, was the true genius. He wasn't a quiet academic. He was a logistical savant, a man who designed the proprietary routing software in the 1990s that became the company's backbone. Thomas Vance was the salesman, the face. The company was originally Hayes Sterling, with Hayes holding a 51% majority stake, and Sterling, an early partner who sold out, and Vance splitting the other 49%. When Arthur Hayes grew ill, he saw Alistair Vance, his partner's son, for exactly what he was, a charismatic sociopath obsessed with image, not substance. Alistair was already dating Eleonora, charming her, seeing her as the final piece of his acquisition. On his deathbed, Arthur Hayes didn't leave his daughter a fortune. He left her an arsenal. He placed his entire 51% stake in an ironclad trust, managed by his lawyer, Gregory Taft. Eleonora would receive a generous stipend, but the voting shares would remain dormant, held by the trust for 20 years. Alistair, upon marrying Eleonora, had his lawyers attack the trust, but it was impenetrable. He was forced to run the company with only his 49%, having bought out the Sterling family, while the 51% majority sat silently on the sidelines. He was the de facto CEO, but he was never the true owner, except for one clause, a clause Alistair had never even known existed, buried deep in the trust's bylaws. Arthur Hayes knew his daughter. He knew she was kind, trusting, and prone to see the good in people. He also knew Alistair would eventually reveal his true nature. The trust, therefore, contained Article 7, Section 4, the Moral Negligence Clause. The clause stated that the trust would be immediately dissolved, and all assets, the 51% voting shares, would be transferred directly to Eleonora Hayes in the event that her husband, Alistair Vance, did commit an act of such profound public disparagement or cruelty as to fundamentally breach the covenant of good faith inherent in their union and his stewardship of the Hayes legacy. The sole arbiter of this breach was the executor, Gregory Taft. For 2 years, Gregory had watched. He had documented every private slight, every dismissive comment Eleonora had confided in him. But Alistair had been careful. Until tonight. Tonight, in his hubris, he had handed Eleonora the keys to the entire kingdom. At 9 a.m. on Monday, Alistair Vance strode into the 60th floor boardroom at the Sterling Vance Tower. He was furious, having been summoned by an emergency text from the board secretary. "What is the meaning of this?" he barked, throwing his briefcase onto the polished mahogany table. "Who called this meeting? I am the CEO. All meetings go through me." The room was already full. The entire board was there. Robert Denton, his man. Beatrice Croft, a sharp older woman who had been on the board since the Hayes Sterling days. Stephen Chen, the neutral CFO, and 2 others. I called it Alistair. Alistair turned. Eleonora was sitting at the head of the table, the traditional chairman's seat. Beside her sat Gregory Taft, who was meticulously arranging a stack of documents. Alistair laughed. It was a harsh, sharp sound. "Eleonora, what is this? Is this a joke? Are you and your dusty old lawyer trying to stage some sort of intervention after your little tantrum over the weekend?" "This is not an intervention, Mr. Vance," Gregory said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of the law. "This is a transfer of power. As of 7:05 a.m. this morning, per the execution of the last will and testament of Arthur Hayes, the primary Hayes Family Trust has been dissolved." The blood drained from Alistair's face. Robert Denton looked confused. "What? What trust?" "Mr. Taft," Eleonora said calmly, "please distribute the folders." Gregory stood and, with the quiet dignity of an undertaker, placed a thick, leather-bound folder in front of each board member. "As you all know," Eleonora began, her voice steady and strong, "my father held a 51% majority stake in this company. For the past 5 years, that stake has been held in a dormant trust." Alistair was white as a sheet. "A dormant trust. It's locked for 20 years. Everyone knows this. This is This is theatre. You have no power here, Eleonora. Please direct your attention to page 54, Gregory said. Article 7, Section 4. The board members began to read. Beatrice Croft's eyes widened. Stephen Chen, the CFO, took off his glasses and rubbed his face as if seeing a ghost. The moral negligence clause, Beatrice whispered, a slow smile spreading across her face. Arthur, you magnificent bastard. This is ridiculous, Alistair roared, slamming his fist on the table. You can't be serious. Public disparagement? You're going to seize control of a $5 billion company because I made a joke at a party. It wasn't a joke, Alistair. It was a character assassination, Eleonora said, her voice cutting through his rage. And it was the final condition of my father's will. Mr. Taft, as executor, witnessed your speech at the gala, as did 300 other people. He has certified the breach. The trust is dissolved. The shares are mine. She slid a single piece of paper across the table to him. It was a stock certificate, newly issued, bearing her name, Eleonora Hayes, 51% of Sterling Vance Global. You, Alistair whispered, his entire body trembling. You, snake, you planned this. You planned this, Alistair, Eleonora countered, standing up. She was no longer the shrinking wife. She was a woman transformed, radiating a cold authority that filled the room. You did this. Every time you dismissed me, every time you called me stupid, every time you treated me like an object, you were loading the gun. On Friday night, you just finally pulled the trigger. She looked at the assembled board. I am now the majority shareholder of this company, and as my first act, I call for a new vote. A vote to remove Alistair Vance as CEO and chairman of the board, effective immediately. The boardroom, which moments before had been a stage for Alistair's disbelief, instantly became a war zone. The air crackled with the charged energy of a hostile takeover. Alistair, recovering from the initial shock, morphed from denial to pure, distilled rage. You can't do this. This is illegal. This morality clause is archaic. It wouldn't hold up in a kindergarten court, let alone the state of New York. It was drafted by the finest trust and estate lawyers at Sullivan and Cromwell, Mr. Vance, Gregory Taft replied, his tone placid. It is ironclad. We have already filed the preliminary injunctions this morning. Any attempt by you to access company funds or assets will be blocked by 6 p.m. today. Alistair spun on the board members. Robert, you're not going to let this happen, are you? Stephen? We just posted the best quarter in the company's history. Are you going to let her? He pointed a trembling finger at Eleonora. A woman who thinks logistics is about matching drapes take over? She's pregnant. She's emotional. She's clearly having a breakdown. Robert Denton, Alistair's COO, stammered. Alistair, this is a lot to take in. A 51% stake. That's a controlling interest. It's her, Alistair spat. She's not a businesswoman. Beatrice Croft, the older board member, finally spoke. Her voice was like dry leaves scraping the pavement. She is Arthur Hayes's daughter, Alistair, and I sat on this board when he was in charge. You, on the other hand, are Thomas Vance's son. All flash, no substance. I've been warning you for a year about the exposure in Singapore. You ignored me. The Singapore deal is sound, Alistair shouted. The Singapore deal, Stephen Chen, the CFO, interjected, his voice quiet but firm, is currently $300 million over budget and is being investigated by local authorities for financial irregularities. I brought this to your attention last month. You told me to bury it in the quarterly. Alistair looked at Stephen as if he'd been stabbed. You're siding with her? I am siding with the company, Alistair, Stephen said, adjusting his tie. "And the company's majority shareholder is Ms. Hayes. The bylaws are clear. She has the votes. This is a formality." Eleonora watched the exchange, her hands clasped calmly on the table. She had known this would be messy. She had counted on Alistair's arrogance to be his undoing. "The vote, please," Eleonora said. "A motion to remove Alistair Vance as CEO and chairman, for cause, citing gross mismanagement and reputational risk." "Seconded," Beatrice Croft said instantly. "All in favour?" Beatrice's hand shot up. Stephen Chen's followed a second later. Robert Denton looked at Alistair, his face a mask of panic, and then, seeing his career flashing before his eyes, he slowly, agonizingly, raised his hand. "That's 3, Gregory Taft announced. "With Ms. Hayes's own 51%, the motion carries overwhelmingly. Mr. Vance, you are hereby relieved of your duties." Alistair Vance didn't move. He just stared at Robert Denton, the man he had promoted, the man he golfed with, the man who had just hammered the final nail in his coffin. "Judas," Alistair whispered. "Security," Eleonora said, not to anyone in the room, but into a small earpiece. The boardroom doors opened. 2 large men in professional suits, the private security team she had hired, stepped in. "This is my building," Alistair roared, finally lunging to his feet. "It's my company," Eleonora replied, her voice ice. "Gentlemen, please escort Mr. Vance from the premises. He is to be allowed to collect his personal effects from his office, and that is all. His access codes are to be deactivated immediately." "You won't get away with this, Eleonora," he screamed as the guards took his arms. "I will sue you. I will sue the estate. I will take you for every penny. I'll tell the press you're insane. I'll fight for custody. You will not do this to me." "You did this to yourself, Alistair," she said, turning to look at him as they dragged him to the door. "You publicly insulted your pregnant wife. You just didn't realize who she was. You should have read the fine print." Alistair let out an incoherent yell as the door shut, leaving the boardroom in stunned silence. Eleonora took a deep breath, the first she felt she had taken in years. The adrenaline was pounding, but she held it at bay. She turned back to the shell-shocked board. "Well," she said, pulling the chairman's seat closer to the table. "That's that. Stephen, I want a full, unredacted audit of the Singapore deal and all related shell corporations on my desk by end of day. Beatrice, I'm promoting you to vice chair. I'll need your guidance on cleaning up Alistair's mess. Robert." Robert Denton flinched. "You have 24 hours to prove to me why you're not just Alistair's echo. I suggest you start by finding every file he tried to hide from Stephen. Am I clear?" Robert nodded, sweating. "Yes. Yes, Madam Chairwoman." Eleonora leaned forward. "Good. Now, gentlemen, and Beatrice, let's get to work." The next 2 weeks were a blur of corporate warfare. Alistair, true to his word, had gone to the press. The New York Post ran a lurid headline. "Iris Hormones, pregnant wife, seizes CEO hubby's company in insane coup." Alistair painted himself as the victim of a vindictive, emotionally unstable woman. He gave interviews from a borrowed office, claiming she was being manipulated by the vulture Gregory Taft, and that her pregnancy had made her erratic. He was counting on the sexist narrative to win him public support and spook the shareholders. But Eleonora didn't play his game. She did not give a single interview. She did not issue a statement. She worked. She and Stephen Chen, the CFO, had locked themselves in the finance department. The full, unredacted audit of the Singapore deal was just the tip of the iceberg. He was sloppy, Stephen said, at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday, surrounded by cold coffee cups and printouts. He was so arrogant, he thought no one would ever check his work. "Show me," Eleonora said, rubbing her temples. The pregnancy made the long hours doubly exhausting, but the rage fueled her. Stephen pointed to a line item. "Here, Apex Holdings, a consulting firm based in the Cayman Islands. He's been wiring them 7 figures a month for the last year, classified as developmental consultation for the Singapore project." "And what is Apex Holdings?" Eleonora asked. "As far as I can tell," Stephen said, "it's nothing. It's a post office box, a ghost corporation. He's been using the Singapore overruns as a cover to siphon money directly from the company." "Embezzlement," Eleonora stated. It wasn't a question. Plain and simple. He was bleeding the company dry. He was building his own lifeboat, probably to finance a hostile buyout of the remaining shares, including, he thought, yours. He just needed more time. His insult at the gala, Eleonora realized aloud. It wasn't just him being cruel. He was under immense pressure. The Singapore deal was collapsing. The auditors were sniffing around. He was lashing out. He needed me to remain small and stupid. "There's more," Stephen said, looking grim. He pulled up a different file, wire transfers from Apex Holdings. He wasn't just saving the money, he was spending it. He showed her the transfers, millions of dollars moving from the Cayman account to a private New York bank. "Who does this account belong to?" Eleonora asked. "I had to pull a few strings," Stephen said. "The account holder is a Ms. Sabrina Reed." The name hit Eleonora like a physical blow. Sabrina Reed, a stunning, ambitious woman from the marketing department. Eleonora had hosted her at the penthouse for a team-building dinner just 6 months ago. Alistair had insisted on it. "His mistress," Eleonora whispered. The humiliation she felt at the gala was nothing compared to this. This was a betrayal that cut deeper than any public insult. He hadn't just stolen the company's money, he had stolen it for her. "He bought her an apartment," Stephen said softly, showing her the final transaction. A wire transfer to a realtor for a penthouse on Park Avenue, just 10 blocks from their own. Eleonora stood up and walked to the window. The city was laid out before her, a tapestry of indifferent lights. She thought she would feel rage or a desire for revenge. Instead, she felt a profound, cold clarity. Alistair hadn't just seen her as stupid. He had seen her as a complete fool. He had been laughing at her, with his COO, with his mistress, with the entire world. "Stephen," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "I want you to call the SEC, and then I want you to call the district attorney's office. Give them everything. Apex Holdings, Sabrina Reed, the wire transfers, all of it." "Eleonora," Stephen said, that's not just a corporate lawsuit. That's a criminal case. He'll go to prison." He stole $300 million to fund his affair and tried to blame the losses on his empty-headed wife. Prison is where he belongs. What about Ms. Reed? Eleonora thought for a moment. She was a knowing accomplice to fraud. Give her name to the DA as well, and have our legal team file a civil suit to seize the penthouse. It was bought with stolen company money. It belongs to the shareholders. She turned back from the window, her silhouette framed against the skyline. The pregnancy, which Alistair had used as a weapon against her, now felt like armor. "He wanted a war, Stephen," she said. "He just didn't realize I had all the ammunition." Alistair's smear campaign came to an abrupt, screeching halt. The moment the DA's office unsealed the indictment, the narrative changed. Iris Hormones became the Vance conspiracy, CEO indicted for 300 metro fraud. Alistair Vance, the man who had commanded ballrooms, was now the subject of a perp walk. The images of him in a rumpled suit, his hands cuffed behind his back, being led into a black sedan by federal agents, were plastered everywhere. His attempt to paint Eleonora as erratic now looked like the desperate, manipulative projections of a cornered criminal. But Eleonora wasn't finished. The criminal charges would take time. The corporate governance of Sterling Vance Global would not. She had called a full, extraordinary meeting of the shareholders. The event was held not in a private boardroom, but in the grand ballroom of the Marriott Marquis, a venue large enough to hold the hundreds of investors, fund managers, and press who had descended. The room was buzzing. Eleonora, now nearly 8 months pregnant, walked onto the stage. She was not the shrinking, nervous woman from the gala. She wore a custom-tailored power suit in a deep charcoal grey, her hair pulled back. She commanded the space. "Good morning," she began, her voice resonating with calm authority. "We are here today for one reason: to restore integrity to Sterling Vance Global. My name is Eleonora Hayes, and as of 2 weeks ago, I am your majority shareholder." She clicked a remote. The screen behind her lit up, not with smiling corporate photos, but with flowcharts. For the last 18 months, the man you knew as your CEO, Alistair Vance, has not been working for you. He has been stealing from you. For 30 minutes, Eleonora laid it all out. She didn't use hyperbole. She used Stephen Chen's audit. She showed them the wire transfers to Apex Holdings. She showed them the false invoices from the Singapore project. She showed them the financial architecture of her husband's grand theft. "This," she said, "is not just mismanagement. It is a profound, criminal breach of fiduciary duty. It stops today." Alistair's few remaining allies in the audience tried to shout her down. A man from a hedge fund that Alistair had personally enriched stood up. "This is a family squabble. You're dragging the company through your messy divorce. What do you, a pregnant art historian, know about running a global logistics empire?" Eleonora looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "I know that you don't sign off on a $300 million expenditure to a company that doesn't exist. I know that you don't leverage the company's pension fund to cover a bad investment, which Mr. Vance did last quarter. And most importantly, I know that the Hayes Sterling routing software, which this company still runs on, was designed by my father, Arthur Hayes. I grew up at his knee, learning this business while Mr. Vance was learning how to cheat at golf." The room fell silent. "Alistair Vance is gone," she continued. "His accomplice, Ms. Sabrina Reed, has been terminated and is facing her own indictment. His COO, Robert Denton, has been fired. We have a new interim board. Beatrice Croft is my vice chair. Stephen Chen is my acting CFO. We have cooperated fully with the SEC and the DA. We will retrieve every stolen dollar." She paused, letting the weight of her actions sink in. "But that is the past. Let's talk about the future." She clicked the remote again. The screen changed to a new logo, a subtle redesign. Hayes Sterling Global. A gasp went through the room. "We are returning to our roots," Eleonora announced. "To integrity, to efficiency, to the genius of Arthur Hayes. My first act as chairwoman is to announce that the entire Singapore project is being scrapped. We are writing off the loss. My second act is to announce a new 10% dividend for all shareholders, funded by the preliminary assets seized from Alistair's fraudulent accounts. And my third act is to announce our new CEO, hired this morning, a woman who has successfully run the port of Antwerp for the last decade, Ms. Helen Shaw." The applause started as a ripple and became a tidal wave. They weren't just clapping for the dividend, they were clapping for the decisiveness, for the end of the circus. Eleonora raised her hand for silence. This company is not a toy. It is not a piggy bank. It is a legacy. My father's legacy. And as long as I am in this chair, it will be treated with respect. Thank you. She walked off the stage, not to the sound of flashbulbs, but to a standing ovation. She had taken the public humiliation Alistair had dealt her and forged it into a gavel, and she had just brought it down, decisively, on his entire world. 1 month later, Eleonora Hayes stood in the corner office on the 60th floor, the office that had, for so long, been Alistair's. The black leather chairs and chrome desk were gone, replaced with warm woods, comfortable furniture, and a large framed original schematic of her father's first logistics patent. The company was Hayes Sterling Global. The press, once so eager to mock her, now called her the Iron Heiress. The stock, after an initial wobble, had soared. Helen Shaw, the new CEO, was proving to be a ruthless and brilliant operator, and Stephen Chen, now permanent CFO, had rooted out the last vestiges of Alistair's cronyism. There was a soft knock on her door. It was Gregory Taft. "They're here," he said. Eleonora nodded, taking a seat behind her new desk. "Send them in." The doors opened, and 2 men in suits entered. One was Alistair's divorce lawyer. The other was Alistair. He looked terrible. He was out on bail, pending a trial he was certain to lose. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed, desperate gauntness. He was a king in exile, and he knew it. "Eleonora," he said, his voice raspy. "Mr. Vance," she replied, her tone professional. "Please, sit. This is a bit much, don't you think?" He gestured around the office. "My office." "The company's office," she corrected him. "And I am the company. What do you want? Your lawyer scheduled this meeting as urgent." Alistair's lawyer, a man named Shaw, cleared his throat. "Ms. Hayes, Madam Chairwoman, my client he is prepared to offer a full concession on the divorce. He will make no claim on any assets. In return, he asks that you, as the primary victim and witness in his criminal case, petition the DA for leniency. Perhaps a lesser charge. Probation, not prison." Eleonora looked at Alistair for a long, silent moment. She saw the man she had once, briefly, loved, and she saw the shell that remained. "Leniency," she repeated. "Nora, please," Alistair begged, leaning forward. "Don't do this. Think of the baby. He shouldn't be born with his father in prison. It's not right. What I did, it was a mistake. I was under pressure. You know the pressure I was under." Eleonora placed a hand on her stomach. The baby kicked, as if in response. "The pressure you were under," she said, her voice a dangerous whisper, "was from stealing $300 million to give to your mistress. The pressure was from lying to the board, to your shareholders, and to me, every single day for 2 years. That's not pressure, Alistair. That's a sociopathic lack of character. Please," he whispered. "You ask me to think of my child," Eleonora said, standing up. I am thinking about raising a child in a world where actions have consequences. I am thinking about teaching my son that you do not get to publicly destroy a person, especially the person carrying your child, and then ask for leniency when you get caught." She walked to the door and held it open. "You will make no claim on any assets because you have no assets, Alistair. The penthouse was seized. Your bank accounts are frozen. Your stock options were voided for cause. You have nothing. You are not conceding anything. You are accepting reality." "Eleonora, you can't." "Get out," she said. "Mr. Shaw, if you contact me again with such a pathetic request, I will file for a restraining order." Alistair will face the consequences of his actions, the full consequences. Alistair stared at her, his eyes filled with a hatred that was potent, but powerless. He was led out by his lawyer, a broken man. Eleonora closed the door and let out a breath she felt she had been holding since that night at the gala. It was over. She walked to the great window, looking out over Central Park. The city was hers, the company was hers, the future was hers. She was Eleonora Hayes, the chairwoman of Hayes Sterling Global. She was a mother-to-be. She had been publicly insulted by her husband, and she had taken everything from him. Not out of revenge, she realized, but out of necessity. She had done it to protect her father's legacy and to build a new one for her son. Alistair had tried to make her a footnote in his story. He had no idea she was the author of his. 3 months had passed. The chill of that October boardroom battle had given way to the deep, biting cold of a New York January. The 60th floor corner office at Hayes Sterling Tower was no longer a battleground. It was a command center. Eleonora, now just days from her due date, ran the company with a quiet, decisive authority that had silenced even the most skeptical Wall Street analysts. The Iron Heiress nickname had stuck, but its tone had shifted from mockery to respect. Hayes Sterling Global, under the triumvirate of Eleonora, Beatrice Croft, and the new CEO Helen Shaw, had not only stabilized, but had posted a preliminary quarterly profit that eclipsed any of Alistair's. Eleonora had proven that her father's genius wasn't just in her blood. It was in her strategic mind. She had reinvested the seized funds from the Apex accounts into revolutionary new green logistics, making the company a darling of ESG investors. She had turned Alistair's poison into her company's cure. But the final act of the drama was not taking place in a boardroom. It was taking place in the sterile, imposing confines of the Thurgood Marshall United States Courthouse. The trial of the United States versus Alistair Vance was the hottest ticket in town. It was a slam-dunk case for the prosecution. The paper trail, meticulously organized by Stephen Chen, was irrefutable. The wire transfers, the false invoices, the testimony of a dozen executives who had been bullied or duped by Alistair. It was a mountain of evidence. Alistair's only defense was to attack the witness. His legal team, a high-priced group of sharks paid for by the last dregs of his liquidated personal assets, had one strategy: paint Eleonora Hayes as a woman scorned, a vindictive hormonal wife who had fabricated a corporate conspiracy to punish a philandering husband. "They're going to put her on the stand tomorrow," Gregory Taft advised, meeting Eleonora in her office after a long day of pre-trial motions. "They will be merciless, Eleonora. They will bring up the gala. They will bring up Sabrina. They will try to make you cry." "Let them," Eleonora said, standing and moving to the window. Her large, round belly was a prominent silhouette against the winter skyline. "Do you know what Alistair's true weakness was, Gregory? He believed his own press. He thought he was the smartest man in every room. He believed that my pregnancy made me weak, that my kindness was stupidity. He's still making that same mistake." The next day, the courtroom was packed. Alistair sat at the defendant's table, looking thin and ashen. He refused to look at her. Eleonora Hayes took the stand. She was the picture of calm, maternal power. Alistair's lead attorney, a slick man named Harrison, approached her. "Mrs. Vance? Or do you prefer Ms. Hayes now? Ms. Hayes is the name on my birth certificate and on the stock certificates of this company." "It will suffice," she replied, her voice clear and carrying perfectly in the silent room. "Ms. Hayes, is it not true that you discovered these so-called financial irregularities just 2 days after a public and rather embarrassing disagreement with your husband at the Sterling Vance Gala. My husband publicly called me an empty-headed incompetent in front of 300 people, Eleonora stated, not as an accusation, but as a fact. It was not a disagreement. It was a public humiliation. So you were angry, Harrison pressed. I was enlightened, Eleonora countered. His cruelty was the catalyst I needed to re-examine the man I was married to. When I re-examined the man, I felt it was my fiduciary duty, as the silent majority shareholder, to re-examine the company he was running. How convenient, Harrison said with a sneer. And in this re-examination, you, an art historian with no business experience, suddenly uncovered a multi-million-dollar fraud that our client, a man with an MBA from Harvard, had supposedly orchestrated. Mr. Harrison, Eleonora said, leaning forward slightly, are you suggesting that one needs an MBA to read a balance sheet? Or are you suggesting that my Vassar education was insufficient? I found the fraud not because I am a scorned wife, but because I was the only person with the authority to look who wasn't on Alistair's payroll. He surrounded himself with yes-men like Robert Denton and sycophants. He never, for 1 second, believed that the decorative wife he married was capable of simple addition. Harrison paced, trying to recover. And this mistress, Ms. Reed, you found out about her, didn't you? This wasn't about fraud. It was about revenge on the woman who had stolen your husband. The courtroom held its breath. This was the moment. They were expecting tears, a breakdown, a flash of jealous rage. Eleonora Hayes looked past the lawyer, past the judge, and directly at the jury. Mr. Harrison, I found out about Miss Reed's complicity at 2 o'clock in the morning in a boardroom while reviewing wire transfers with my CFO. Was I hurt? Yes. This man, she gestured to Alistair, didn't just cheat on his wife. He cheated on his partners, his shareholders, and his employees. He stole $300 million from our company, to buy his mistress a penthouse. She folded her hands over her stomach. You are trying to paint this as a crime of passion. You are mistaken. This was a crime of arithmetic. He stole. I am the one who caught him. His affair is a footnote in his depravity. His fraud is the headline. He did not lose his company because he insulted his wife. He lost his company because he was a common thief, one who was arrogant enough to believe I was too stupid to ever count the receipts. Harrison had no more questions. The verdict came 2 days later. Eleonora was not in court. She had, in the early hours of that morning, gone into labor. She was in a private room at Lenox Hill Hospital, the city lights twinkling outside, when Gregory Taft walked in. The room was quiet, save for the soft new sounds of a sleeping infant in her arms. Gregory, she whispered, her face tired but radiant. You're just in time. Gregory, a man not known for emotional displays, found himself smiling, his eyes misty. Eleonora. He's perfect. He's a boy, she said, tracing the baby's tiny hand. A new generation of Hayes, Gregory said softly. He sat in the chair beside her bed. What's the news from downtown? She asked, her gaze never leaving her son. Guilty, Gregory reported. All counts, securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, embezzlement. The judge was... Gregory almost chuckled. He was incensed. He called Alistair a man of profound arrogance and limitless greed who mistook his wife's grace for weakness. Sabrina Reed, having testified against him, received a plea deal for 5 years. For Alistair, the prosecution is recommending 20. He'll be lucky to see daylight in 15. Eleonora nodded slowly, absorbing the finality of it. An entire chapter of her life, a chapter of subjugation and deceit, was finally, irrevocably closed. The man who had tried to erase her was now being erased himself, relegated to a number in a federal prison. "It's over, Gregory," she whispered. "It's just beginning, Eleonora," he corrected gently. He looked at the baby. Have you chosen a name?" "I have," Eleonora said. She had thought about it for months. She had considered Arthur after her father. But that was a name of the past, a legacy to be protected. This child was a new legacy, one to be built. He was the first of his line, not the continuation of another's. She looked down at the tiny, perfect face, a new life born from the ashes of the old. He was a Hayes, through and through. He was her son. "His name is Arthur," she said, her voice full of a new, different kind of strength. "Arthur Hayes. Not Vance. The Vance name ends with his father. The Hayes legacy starts anew, right here." She held her son close, the weight of the company, the trial and the betrayal lifting from her shoulders. She was no longer just the iron heiress or the chairwoman. She was Eleonora Hayes, and she was a mother. The view from the 60th floor was nothing compared to this. What a story of karma and consequences. Alistair Vance thought his wife was just a silent accessory, a pretty prop for his extravagant life. He believed her pregnancy was a weakness he could exploit, and her intellect was something he could mock. He learned, far too late, that in a world of corporate games and hidden legacies, you should never, ever underestimate the person you push into the corner. He publicly insulted his pregnant wife, and in doing so, handed her the very keys to his kingdom. She didn't just get revenge, she got justice. She got the company. What did you think of Eleonora's incredible transformation? Did Alistair get what he deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this story of justice and empowerment, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more dramatic real-life stories every single week. He was a titan of industry, a man who commanded boardrooms and bent markets to his will. She was his elegant, intelligent wife, the silent architect of his empire. But in the glittering, hollow world of New York's elite, loyalty is a commodity, and respect is a luxury not everyone can afford. One fateful night, at the city's most prestigious charity gala, under the watchful eyes of the powerful and the privileged, he made a choice. To appease his new flame, a woman draped in diamonds and ambition, he raised his hand to the wife who had built him. A single, sharp slap that echoed louder than the orchestra. He thought it was the end of an argument. He had no idea it was the beginning of his end, because while he slept soundly that night, she was igniting a fire that would burn his entire world to the ground. The Starlight Charity Gala was the apex of the Manhattan social calendar, a glittering spectacle held in the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small carriage, dripped light onto a sea of couture gowns and bespoke tuxedos. The air hummed with the low thrum of powerful conversations, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the soft strains of a string quartet. To the outside world, Damien and Catherine Blackwood were the evening's reigning couple. He, the CEO of Blackwood Innovations, a tech behemoth he'd built from the ground up, was a man carved from ambition and arrogance. His jaw was sharp, his eyes a cold, calculating blue, and his smile a weapon he wielded with practiced ease. Catherine, his wife of 10 years, was his perfect counterpart, or so it seemed. Graceful and poised, with intelligent hazel eyes that saw far more than they let on, she possessed a quiet strength that most people mistook for meekness. She wore an emerald silk gown, that shimmered like liquid moonlight, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within her. She had been the first investor in Damien's dream, not with money, but with intellect. Her Wharton MBA and razor-sharp strategic mind had transformed his raw coding talent into a multi-billion-dollar empire. She had drafted the business plans, navigated the early-stage funding rounds, and architected the corporate structure. He was the face. She was the foundation. A foundation he had begun to treat as little more than pavement to be trod upon. The source of that disrespect was currently clinging to his arm, a vibrant slash of crimson in the muted elegance of the ballroom. Her name was Serafina Munro, a model-turned-influencer whose ambition was as sharp and dangerous as the stilettos on her feet. She laughed a little too loudly, her scarlet lips perpetually curved in a predatory smile. She was everything Catherine was not, ostentatious, demanding, and utterly transparent in her desires. And Damien, a man terrified of losing the status he'd fought so ruthlessly to attain, was utterly captivated by her public performance of adoration. "Darling," Serafina purred, her fingers tracing the lapel of Damien's Tom Ford tuxedo. "Mr. Abernathy from the Times is watching us. We should give him something to write about." She tilted her head towards a corner where several high-profile investors, including the notoriously shrewd Robert Chen of Chen Capital, were in conversation. "Go on, Damien. Remind them who the king of this city is." Damien's chest puffed out. He thrived on such validation. Catherine watched, a familiar ache tightening in her chest. She saw the subtle way he preened under Serafina's gaze, the way he subtly angled his body away from her, his own wife, as if she were a relic of a past he was eager to shed. "In a moment, my dear," Damien said, his eyes scanning the room. "First, I need to ensure everything is perfect." His gaze fell on Catherine. "Catherine, did you confirm the seating arrangement with the event planner? I specifically said I wanted to be at the same table as Senator Thompson." "Yes, Damien," Catherine replied, her voice calm and even, betraying none of her inner turmoil. "We are at table 1, with the Senator and Mrs. Thompson, as you requested. I confirmed it myself an hour ago." Serafina let out a small, condescending laugh. "Always so efficient, aren't we? Like a perfect little assistant." The barb struck its target. Catherine's jaw tightened, but she refused to give Serafina the satisfaction of a reaction. Damien, however, either missed the malice or chose to ignore it. He was too focused on his own performance. For the next hour, Catherine played her role flawlessly. She smiled. She engaged in polite conversation about art auctions and summering in the Hamptons. She deflected intrusive questions about Damien's latest, rumored acquisition with the grace of a seasoned diplomat. All the while, she was acutely aware of Damien and Serafina, a garish duo moving through the crowd. She saw him whisper in Serafina's ear, saw the possessive hand he placed on the small of her back, a public declaration for all to see. The tension finally snapped later in the evening, near the marbled archway leading to the terrace. Catherine had been speaking with Marcus Thorne, the COO of Blackwood Innovations, and one of the few people who knew the true extent of her contributions to the company. "The quarterly projections are looking aggressive, Catherine," Marcus said, his voice low. "Damien is pushing the R&D department to its limits. I'm worried we're heading for a bubble." "I've seen the data, Marcus," she said quietly. "He's chasing headlines, not sustainable growth. I've warned him." "He doesn't listen to anyone anymore," Marcus lamented, his gaze flicking nervously towards Damien, who was approaching them with Serafina in tow. "What are you two whispering about?" Damien's voice was sharp, laced with suspicion. "Just discussing the quarterly numbers, Damien," Marcus said quickly. Serafina slid her arm around Damien's waist. "Don't let them bore you with business, darling. It's a party." She then looked directly at Catherine, her eyes glittering with malice. "You know, Catherine, you should really try to enjoy yourself. You look so tense. It adds years to your face." Catherine met her gaze, her composure unwavering. "Thank you for your concern, Serafina, but I find that worrying about the health of a $10 billion company is a more productive use of my time than worrying about a few wrinkles." The comeback was swift, precise, and it hit its mark. A flicker of fury crossed Serafina's perfectly made-up face. She turned to Damien, her lower lip trembling theatrically. "Damien, did you hear that? She's insulting me. She's always so cold, so superior." Damien's face darkened. In his mind, Catherine's sharp intellect, once his greatest asset, had become a threat. Her quiet competence felt like a judgment on his loud insecurities. Serafina's manufactured vulnerability was a balm to his fragile ego. He looked from Serafina's pouting face to Catherine's calm, unreadable expression. In front of Marcus, in front of anyone who might be watching from the periphery, he needed to assert his authority. He needed to prove who held the power. "Apologize to her, Catherine," he commanded, his voice low and menacing. Catherine's blood ran cold. "I will not. I have nothing to apologize for." I said, "Apologize." "No, Damien." It was her quiet defiance that broke him. It was the fact that she wasn't cowering. She wasn't afraid. To him it felt like the ultimate betrayal. He saw Serafina looking at him, her eyes wide, waiting. He felt the phantom eyes of the entire New York elite upon him. In that single, terrible moment, his vanity and his cruelty won. He raised his hand. The sound of the slap was sharp, a brutal crack that cut through the murmur of the gala. Catherine's head snapped to the side, the sting blossoming on her cheek like a hot, poisonous flower. A collective gasp rippled through the immediate vicinity. Marcus Thorne froze, his face a mask of horror. For a moment, there was absolute silence, a pocket of stunned disbelief in the heart of the opulent ballroom. Catherine slowly turned her head back to face him. There were no tears in her eyes. There was only a terrifying, crystalline clarity. She looked at Damien, not as her husband, but as a stranger, an enemy. She saw the flicker of shock in his own eyes, as if his hand had acted of its own accord, quickly replaced by a stubborn, defensive glare. She looked at Serafina, who had the decency to look momentarily stunned before a flicker of triumph settled in her eyes. Without a word, Catherine turned and walked away. She didn't run. She didn't stumble. Her back was straight, her head held high. Each step was deliberate, measured, taking her away from the wreckage of her marriage, through the sea of shocked and whispering faces, and out of the grand ballroom into the cool night air. Damien watched her go, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach, but he pushed it down. He had made his point. He had asserted his dominance. He turned to a shaken Serafina and forced a smile. "Now, where were we?" he asked, his voice a little too loud, a little too brittle. He had no idea that the sound of that slap was not an ending, but the starting pistol for a war he was utterly unprepared to fight. The taxi ride from the Pierre to their Upper East Side penthouse was a blur of city lights smearing against the cold glass. Catherine sat perfectly still in the back seat, one hand resting in her lap, the other pressed against the lingering, phantom heat on her cheek. The sting had subsided, replaced by a profound and chilling numbness. It was the numbness of a limb that has been severed, the shock preceding the agony. She felt strangely disconnected from the woman in the emerald gown, the woman who had just been publicly humiliated by her own husband. That woman was a character she had played for a decade. Tonight, the performance had ended. When the taxi pulled up to the imposing limestone facade of their building, the doorman, a kind-faced man named George, rushed to open her door. "Good evening, Mrs. Blackwood. You're home early." His eyes widened slightly as he saw her face, the faint red mark just beginning to bloom on her cheekbone. To his credit, his professional mask didn't slip. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine, George. Thank you," she said, her voice a monotone. But as she walked across the marble lobby, she knew nothing would ever be fine again. The private elevator opened directly into their penthouse. It was a monument to Damien's success, a sprawling space of glass, chrome, and minimalist furniture, with a panoramic view of Central Park. It was cold, impersonal, and curated for magazine spreads. It had never felt like a home. Tonight, it felt like a mausoleum. She walked through the silent, cavernous rooms, her heels clicking an unnervingly loud rhythm on the polished concrete floors. She didn't cry. The time for tears felt 1,000 miles away. What she felt instead was a slow, creeping rage, cold and sharp as a shard of ice. It wasn't the wild, screaming rage of a wounded animal. It was the focused, calculating fury of a grandmaster whose opponent has just made a fatal, unforgivable blunder. The slap wasn't the cause, it was the catalyst. It was the physical manifestation of 1,000 smaller betrayals, 1,000,000 moments of being diminished, ignored, and taken for granted. It was the culmination of every time he had taken credit for her ideas, dismissed her concerns as nagging, and paraded his affairs as trophies of his masculine prowess. He hadn't just struck her, he had tried to erase her. She walked into their shared walk-in closet, a space larger than most New York apartments. On one side were Damien's meticulously organized rows of designer suits and shoes. On the other, her own collection of elegant, understated pieces. She ignored them all. She went to the back, to a locked safe, hidden behind a full-length mirror. She keyed in the code, not their anniversary, not his birthday, but the date she had finalized the patent for the core algorithm that had launched Blackwood Innovations. An algorithm she had written. Inside the safe were her personal documents, some jewelry, and a sleek, encrypted hard drive. She took only the hard drive and a single, slim folio of documents. She then walked into the master bedroom and took a small, leather-bound journal from her nightstand. It was filled with her handwriting, notes, ideas, and strategic plans for the company, many of which Damien had later presented as his own. She didn't pack a suitcase full of clothes. That was what a fleeing victim did. She was not a victim. She was a combatant preparing for battle. She took only a single, expensive-looking leather duffel bag. Into it, she placed the hard drive, the journal, the folio, her laptop, and a toiletry bag with only the essentials. The emerald gown she was wearing felt like a costume from another life. She stripped it off, letting it pool on the floor like a shed skin. She changed into a simple, severe black pantsuit, a crisp white silk blouse, and practical, low-heeled Chanel pumps. It was armor. Her phone buzzed. It was Damien. She ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. Texts began to pour in. "Catherine, where are you? We need to talk. You're overreacting." The final one, sent minutes later, was the most telling. "Don't do anything stupid. Think of the company's reputation." His reputation. Not her pain, not their marriage. The company, the entity she had built. A bitter smile touched her lips. Oh, she was thinking of the company. She was thinking of it very, very carefully. She made one phone call. Jessica Riley, A sharp, alert voice answered on the second ring, despite the late hour. Jessica was her oldest friend, a shark of a divorce lawyer from the prestigious firm of Cromwell, Stern and Vance. The Vance was her father. "Jess, it's me." "Kat, what's wrong? I heard what happened at the gala. My colleague David was there. He called me." "Are you okay?" "He slapped me, Jess. In public." Catherine's voice was steady, devoid of self-pity. There was a pause, and then Jessica's voice turned to steel. "Where are you?" "At the penthouse. I'm leaving now." "Good. Don't engage with him. Don't answer his calls. Where are you going?" "I've booked a suite at the Carlyle, under my maiden name." Vance. The name felt good on her tongue. It was her own. "Okay. I'll meet you there in 40 minutes. We'll start the paperwork." "No," Catherine said firmly. "This isn't about divorce papers. Not yet. That's a skirmish. I'm planning a war." Jessica was silent for a moment, processing. She knew Catherine better than anyone. She knew her friend's calm exterior hid a formidable intellect and an iron will. "Okay," she said slowly. "What's the first move?" "I'm going to need you to look over a non-disclosure agreement. A very, very restrictive one. And I need to get in touch with an old acquaintance. I need you to find the best way to arrange a meeting for tomorrow morning. An urgent one." She took a deep breath. "The name is Alexander Sterling, of Sterling Capital." Jessica let out a low whistle. Alexander Sterling was a legend on Wall Street, a so-called vulture capitalist to his enemies, a visionary investor to his allies. His firm was known for aggressive, often hostile, takeovers of undervalued or poorly managed tech companies. They were also Blackwood Innovation's most feared competitor. "Sterling," Jessica said, her voice a mix of shock and admiration. "Kat, what are you planning?" "Damien thinks the company is his greatest strength," Catherine said, walking towards the elevator, her duffel bag in hand. "He's about to find out that it's his greatest vulnerability. And I know where all the cracks are. After all, I'm the one who papered over them." She ended the call, stepped into the elevator, and descended from the glass tower for the last time. As the door slid shut, she caught her reflection in the polished steel. The woman staring back at her was not the broken wife of Damien Blackwood. It was Catherine Vance, and she was ready to reclaim everything he had taken from her, and more. The shattering was over. The reconstruction was about to begin. The Carlyle Hotel, with its old-world elegance and discreet service, was a world away from the cold modernity of Damien's penthouse. It was a fortress of quiet luxury, the perfect staging ground for what was to come. Catherine's suite, registered under the name Vance, was opulent but comforting, with heavy silk curtains and classic furniture that seemed to absorb the sounds and chaos of the city outside. She didn't sleep. Fueled by adrenaline and 2 decades of suppressed ambition, she worked through the night. Her laptop was open, the encrypted hard drive connected. On the screen were the unvarnished truths of Blackwood Innovations, not the polished PR-spun versions presented to shareholders, but the raw data, suppressed R&D failures, over-leveraged acquisitions, and most damningly, a series of creative accounting practices Damien had insisted upon to inflate their quarterly earnings. Catherine had argued against them, warning that they were a house of cards. Now she was grateful for his arrogance. He had handed her the very wind she needed to blow it all down. Beside the laptop lay her leather-bound journal. She methodically cross-referenced her handwritten notes, strategic plans, market analysis, software architecture ideas, with the company's official development roadmaps. The evidence was irrefutable. Dozens of key innovations, patents and strategic partnerships that Damien had publicly claimed as his own vision had originated, in detail, from her private notes. She had been the ghost in his machine, the architect of his throne. At 7 a.m., Jessica arrived, looking sharp and alert in a navy blue suit. She carried a briefcase and 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Catherine, her eyes scanning her friend's face. "You look like you haven't slept," she observed. "Sleep is a luxury for peacetime, Jess," Catherine replied, taking a sip of the coffee. "Did you make the call?" Jessica nodded, setting her briefcase on the mahogany desk. "It wasn't easy. Alexander Sterling's schedule is locked down tighter than Fort Knox, but the name Vance, coupled with urgent, time-sensitive intelligence on Blackwood Innovations, got his attention. He's cleared his calendar. We have a meeting at his office, 10 a.m. sharp." "Good," Catherine said, a grim satisfaction in her voice. "That gives us time to prepare the presentation." "Kat, are you sure about this?" Jessica asked, her professional caution warring with her personal loyalty. "Going to Sterling. It's like handing a starving wolf the keys to the henhouse. Once you let him in, you can't control what he does." "I'm not looking for control, Jess. I'm looking for a wrecking ball," Catherine stated coldly. "Damien respects only one thing: power, financial power. I'm going to bring a power to his door, so overwhelming that he'll have no choice but to bow. Alexander Sterling is not a partner. He is a weapon." She turned the laptop screen towards Jessica. For the next 2 hours, Catherine walked her friend through the vulnerabilities of Blackwood Innovations. She spoke with a passion and authority Jessica hadn't seen in years. This was the Catherine from Wharton, the brilliant strategist who could dissect a balance sheet like a surgeon. She explained how Damien's aggressive push into volatile markets had left the company dangerously exposed, how the inflated profit margins were hiding a growing debt crisis, and how their most recent flagship product, the Prometheus AI, was built on a flawed and unstable code base, a shortcut Damien had demanded against her explicit advice. "He's running a multi-billion-dollar company like a gambler on a hot streak," Catherine concluded, her voice steely. "But the streak is about to end, and I have the data to prove it." At 9:30 a.m. they left the Carlisle. Catherine wore the same black power suit. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. The faint bruise on her cheek was visible, unconcealed by makeup. It was not a mark of shame. It was a testament, a piece of evidence. Sterling Capital was located in a sleek, imposing skyscraper in the heart of the financial district, a steel and glass needle aimed at the heavens. The lobby was a cathedral of wealth, all polished granite and hushed reverence. They were escorted to the top floor, to Alexander Sterling's private office. The man himself was waiting. Alexander Sterling was in his late 40s, with silvering temples and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He was the antithesis of Damien. Where Damien was loud, Sterling was quiet. Where Damien wore his wealth like a costume, Sterling wore his bespoke suit with an air of complete, unstudied indifference. He radiated a calm, predatory confidence that was far more intimidating than Damien's bluster. He did not smile as they entered. He simply watched, his sharp gaze missing nothing. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice a low baritone. He gestured to the chairs opposite his vast, uncluttered desk. "Your lawyer's message was intriguing." His eyes flickered for a fraction of a second to the mark on her cheek, but his expression remained impassive. Catherine met his gaze without flinching. "Mr. Sterling, thank you for seeing us on such short notice. I believe I have information that will be of significant value to you and your firm." She didn't wait for permission. She placed her laptop on the desk, opened it, and began. She didn't speak of her marriage, of the gala, of the slap. She spoke the language he understood: numbers, data, and strategy. She laid bare the weaknesses of Blackwood Innovations with clinical precision. She presented the inflated earnings reports next to the real, grim figures from her hard drive. She detailed the structural flaws in the Prometheus AI, predicting a catastrophic failure within the next 6 months that would trigger a massive stock devaluation. Finally, she brought up her masterstroke. Damien is currently in final negotiations to acquire a smaller AI firm, Cygnus AI, for $2 billion, she explained, displaying the confidential deal memo she had downloaded. He sees it as a vanity project, but my analysis shows that Cygnus AI's patent portfolio, when combined with Blackwood's existing infrastructure, doesn't create synergy. It creates a redundancy that will cost $500 million in restructuring alone. He is paying a premium for a company whose core technology will be obsolete within 18 months. He is hemorrhaging capital for ego. Alexander Sterling leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, his fingers steepled. He had not interrupted her once. He had simply listened, his sharp eyes following every chart, every projection. The silence in the room was absolute. "This is comprehensive," he said finally, the single word carrying more weight than a dozen compliments. "You're suggesting Blackwood is a house of cards." "I'm stating it as a fact," Catherine corrected him gently. "And I'm offering you the opportunity to be the one holding the fan when it comes time to blow." Sterling leaned back in his chair, his gaze analytical, searching. "Why come to me? You're his wife. A messy divorce. You could take him for half. Why burn the whole kingdom down?" For the first time, Catherine allowed a flicker of personal history to enter her voice. "Because I helped build that kingdom, Mr. Sterling, and my name is not on a single brick. Damien Blackwood believes he is the sole architect. He has forgotten the importance of a strong foundation. I am not here for alimony. I'm not here for a settlement." She paused, letting her words hang in the air before delivering the final, devastating blow. "I am here for equity. I will provide you with the blueprint to acquire his company at a fraction of its current market value. In return, when Sterling Capital takes control, I want a senior executive position, a seat on the new board, and a significant stake in the restructured company. I am not selling my revenge, Mr. Sterling. I am leveraging my intellectual property." Alexander Sterling looked at her, and for the first time, a slow, appreciative smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a predator recognizing a fellow hunter. He wasn't looking at a scorned wife. He was looking at his next, and perhaps most brilliant, business partner. "Ms. Vance," he said, extending a hand across the desk. "I believe we have a deal." Damien Blackwood arrived at the headquarters of Blackwood Innovations at 9 a.m., feeling triumphant. The night had been a blur of champagne and fawning admirers after Catherine's dramatic exit. Serafina had been suitably impressed by his show of strength, and her flattery had soothed his bruised ego. He'd woken up that morning with a mild hangover and a sense of righteous indignation. Catherine's disobedience had been a public embarrassment, but he had handled it. He had put her in her place. He expected she was holed up in some hotel, crying, ready to come crawling back with a tearful apology. He'd make her sweat for a day or two before graciously allowing her to return. He strode through the gleaming lobby, nodding curtly at the employees who scurried out of his way. "Morning, Mr. Blackwood," they'd murmur. He was the king in his castle, the master of his universe. His executive assistant, a perpetually nervous young woman named Clara, met him at his office door. "Good morning, sir. The board members are assembling for the 10 a.m. emergency meeting you called." "Excellent," Damien said, tossing his coat onto a chair. He'd called the meeting to fast-track the Cygnus AI acquisition, a move that would splash his face across every business journal. It was the perfect way to bury the gossip from last night's gala under a headline of corporate conquest. "Any messages?" "Your wife's lawyer called, sir. Jessica Riley," Clara said, her eyes fixed on her tablet. "She said to inform you that Mrs. Blackwood, that Ms. Vance, would be attending the board meeting." Damien laughed, a short, sharp bark. "What? Is she coming to apologize in front of the board? A little dramatic, even for her." He dismissed the thought. She was probably bluffing, trying to rattle him. Fine, let her come. It will be educational for her. At precisely 10 a.m., Damien entered the boardroom on the 50th floor. The room was designed to intimidate, with a long, black granite table and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a godlike view of the city. His board was assembled, a collection of stern, grey-haired men he'd carefully selected for their pliability. Marcus Thorne, the COO, sat among them, his face pale and drawn. He wouldn't meet Damien's eye. "Good morning, gentlemen," Damien began, taking his seat at the head of the table. "I've called you here today to finalize our acquisition of—" The boardroom doors swung open. Damien stopped mid-sentence, an annoyed frown forming on his face. And then he saw her. Catherine stood in the doorway. She was not the woman he had slapped last night. This was a different person entirely. Dressed in her severe black suit, her face composed and resolute, she radiated an aura of unshakable power. The bruise on her cheek was a stark, silent accusation. But she was not alone. Behind her stood Alexander Sterling. A wave of confusion and alarm rippled through the boardroom. Alexander Sterling was their rival, their boogeyman, the shark that circled their waters. His presence here was inexplicable, a violation of the natural order. "Catherine?" Damien stammered, his bravado vanishing in a puff of smoke. "What is this? What is he doing here?" "Good morning, Damien." "Gentlemen," Catherine said, her voice clear and steady as she walked into the room. She didn't take a seat. Instead, she stood at the opposite end of the table, commanding the room's attention. Alexander Sterling stood slightly behind her, a silent, imposing presence. "I apologize for the intrusion. I am here today not as your wife, Damien, but as a representative of a new business proposal. Mr. Sterling is here as my associate." Damien gaped at her. "Business proposal? What are you talking about? This is a private board meeting." "It's about to become a very public one if you don't listen," Catherine said calmly. She nodded to Jessica Riley, who had followed them in, and began handing a thick, bound document to each board member. "Please take a look at the portfolio in front of you. It's an offer from Sterling Capital." The board members, their faces a mixture of confusion and intrigue, began to flip through the pages. A stunned silence descended upon the room, broken only by the rustle of paper. Damien stood up, his face turning a blotchy red. "An offer? An offer for what? This is absurd. Security, get them out of here." "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Mr. Blackwood," Alexander Sterling spoke for the first time, his voice dangerously soft. "Because the document your board is currently reading is a preliminary, but very generous, tender offer to acquire a controlling interest in Blackwood Innovations." The blood drained from Damien's face. "Acquire? You can't. Our stock is at an all-time high. Our valuation is a fantasy," Catherine cut in, her voice sharp as a razor. "And that is why I am here." For the next 20 minutes, Catherine systematically and dispassionately dismantled the company she had helped build. She projected charts and figures onto the room's main screen from her laptop. She exposed the creative accounting, the hidden debt, the precarious market position. She walked them through the technical flaws of the Prometheus AI, predicting its inevitable and costly failure. Her delivery was flawless, her command of the facts absolute. The board members stared, mesmerized and horrified, as the woman they had only ever known as the CEO's quiet, pretty wife revealed herself to be the true master of their company's universe. "And finally," Catherine said, her gaze locking onto Damien's, "the Cygnus AI acquisition." She displayed the internal memo on the screen. "A $2 billion vanity project that will indebt this company for a decade to acquire redundant technology. An act of such profound fiscal irresponsibility that it borders on corporate malfeasance." Robert Chen, the investor who had been present at the gala, looked up from the portfolio, his face grim. "The offer from Sterling Capital is 30% above current market value. Given the irregularities Ms. Vance has just presented, this isn't just a generous offer. It's a lifeline." "This is ridiculous," Damien roared, slamming his fist on the table. "She's a liar, a bitter, scorned woman trying to destroy me." He turned on Catherine. "You did this? To get back at me for last night?" Catherine looked him dead in the eye. The entire room held its breath. "Last night was not the reason, Damien," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying to every corner of the room. "It was merely the permission slip I gave myself to do what was necessary. You built this company on my intellect, my strategies and my work. And when you were done, you decided I was disposable." She gestured to the board. "I am simply demonstrating my value. The value you forgot." She turned back to the stunned board members. "Gentlemen, Sterling Capital's offer is on the table for the next 48 hours. It is conditional on the immediate removal of Damien Blackwood as CEO and the cessation of the Cygnus AI acquisition. Should you accept, I will be overseeing the transition as part of the new management team. I know where the bodies are buried. I also know where the treasure is." She closed her laptop. The presentation was over. Damien stood, shaking with a rage that rendered him speechless. He looked at the faces of his board, men he thought he owned, and saw not loyalty, but cold, hard calculation. He saw them looking from his trembling form to Catherine's steel composure, and he knew, in that gut-wrenching moment, that he had already lost. Catherine and Alexander Sterling turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving a bomb of their own making to detonate behind them. The fallout from the boardroom blitz was swift and brutal. Damien's world, once an impenetrable fortress of wealth and power, began to crumble with terrifying speed. He stormed out of the boardroom after Catherine and Sterling, his mind a maelstrom of fury and disbelief. He tried to rally his board, appealing to their loyalty, to their shared history, but it was useless. He was no longer speaking to friends. He was speaking to businessmen who had just been shown a lifeboat as their ship was taking on water. "Damien, be reasonable," Robert Chen had told him, his voice devoid of sympathy. "The woman just proved with data that our stock is overvalued by at least 40%. Sterling is offering a premium on that inflated price. If we refuse, and this information leaks, which it inevitably will, we'll be facing shareholder lawsuits that will tie us up in court for years. She's checkmated you." His first frantic call was to Serafina. He needed her comfort, her validation, her adoration. He found her at her apartment, surrounded by packed Louis Vuitton luggage. "What's all this?" he demanded, his voice strained. "Are you going somewhere?" Serafina didn't look up from a box of jewelry she was sorting. "I'm going to Milan for a few weeks. A new contract," she said, her tone cool and distant. "Milan? Now? I need you here," he exclaimed. "Catherine, she's trying to destroy me. She went to Alexander Sterling." Serafina finally looked at him, her expression unreadable. I heard. It's all over the financial news feeds already. Sterling Capital launches hostile takeover bid for Blackwood Innovations. She shrugged, a delicate, dismissive gesture. It sounds messy. Messy? It's a war. And I need you by my side. We're a power couple, remember? A small, cruel smile played on her lips. Damien, darling, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. We were a power couple when you had power. I attached myself to a rising star, not a falling one. A CEO in the middle of a hostile takeover, with his brilliant wife leading the charge against him. That's not a good look. It's embarrassing. The word hit him harder than the slap he'd delivered to Catherine. Embarrassing. That's what he was to her now. He realized with sickening clarity that he had never been more than a stepping stone, a means to an end. Her affection had been a transaction, and his value had just plummeted. So that's it? You're just leaving? He asked, his voice cracking. Don't be so dramatic, she said, snapping the jewelry box shut. Think of it as a strategic retreat. Call me when you've sorted out all of this. She brushed past him, her expensive perfume a final, cloying insult. He knew she would never answer his call. The rat was leaving the sinking ship. His next blow came from within his own company. He tried to lock down the company's servers to hide the evidence Catherine had presented, but it was too late. He received a call from Marcus Thorne. Marcus, I need you to initiate a digital lockdown. Erase the R&D logs from the last 6 months. Shred the quarterly variance reports. I can't do that, Damien. Marcus's voice was firm, laced with a new kind of confidence. What do you mean you can't? I'm still the CEO of this company. You work for me. No, Damien, I work for the company, for the shareholders. And right now, the best thing for this company is a smooth transition of power, Marcus said. There was a pause. I've already provided Ms. Vance and Mr. Sterling's legal team with the supplementary data they requested. The server logs, the internal emails, all of it. It corroborates her entire presentation. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, that Damien couldn't even speak. Marcus, his loyal COO, the man he'd promoted and trusted for years, had turned on him. Why, Marcus? He finally whispered. Because she was right, Marcus said simply. About everything. About the flawed code, about the Cygnus deal, about you. You stopped listening a long time ago, Damien. You were going to run this company into the ground out of sheer ego. Catherine, Ms. Vance, she's saving it, and all of our jobs along with it. I'm sorry, but my loyalty is to the house she built, not to the man who was trying to burn it down. The final nail in his coffin was the media. The story was too juicy to ignore. Billionaire CEO's wife teams with rival to seize control of empire, screamed the headlines. They painted Catherine as a wronged genius, a strategic mastermind reclaiming her legacy. They dug into her past, her academic achievements at Wharton, her early, uncredited role in the company's founding. She became a feminist icon overnight. Damien, in contrast, was portrayed as a fool and a brutish tyrant, the man who slapped his wife and lost his empire in the same week. The photo of Catherine leaving the gala, her face resolute, was plastered everywhere. The faint bruise was a symbol of his downfall. He holed up in his penthouse, the glass walls that had once felt like a symbol of his dominance, now feeling like a cage. He watched the stock ticker for Blackwood Innovations. The board, facing overwhelming pressure, had publicly announced they were entering into negotiations with Sterling Capital. The stock price, after a brief, panicked dip, had soared on the news of the acquisition and the promise of new, competent leadership. He was undone, utterly and completely, He had underestimated the woman who stood beside him for 10 years. He had mistaken her silence for submission, her grace for weakness. He had thought she was an accessory, a beautiful object to be displayed and, when necessary, disciplined. He never realized she was the queen, and he had just been a pawn in her long, patient game. The unraveling was complete. All that was left was the final, crushing silence of defeat. The 48 hours that followed the boardroom meeting were a whirlwind of legal maneuvering and high-stakes negotiations, but the outcome was never in doubt. With Marcus Thorne's cooperation and the irrefutable data Catherine had provided, the board of Blackwood Innovations had no choice. They voted unanimously to accept Sterling Capital's offer. Damien Blackwood was officially and ignominiously terminated as CEO, forced to sell his shares as part of the deal. He was given a severance package dictated by the ironclad prenuptial agreement Catherine had insisted upon years ago, an agreement he had laughed at the time. It protected all premarital assets and intellectual property. As she was the source of nearly all the company's foundational IP, he was left with a fraction of the fortune he once commanded. He was still a rich man, but he was no longer a king. He was just another wealthy, forgotten casualty of Wall Street. The day the deal was finalized, Catherine walked back into the headquarters of the company she had built, not as the CEO's wife, but as the new chief strategy officer and a member of the board of directors for the newly formed entity, Sterling Blackwood. The atmosphere was electric. Employees who had once averted their eyes from her now looked at her with a mixture of awe and respect. She was no longer a phantom in the hallways. She was the acknowledged power. Her first act was to call a company-wide town hall meeting. Standing on a stage in the building's atrium, she looked out at the hundreds of faces staring up at her. She didn't gloat. She didn't mention Damien's name. She spoke of the future. For too long, this company has chased short-term gains and fleeting headlines, she began, her voice resonating with a newfound authority. We have prioritized image over innovation, ego over excellence. That era is over. Starting today, we are returning to the principles that once made us great: sustainable growth, fearless research, and a commitment to building technology that lasts. She laid out her vision, a clear, concise, and brilliant roadmap for the company's next 5 years. She announced the immediate cancellation of the disastrous Cygnus AI acquisition, redirecting the funds into internal R&D and promoting several talented engineers whom Damien had overlooked. She answered questions from the floor with a depth of knowledge and a clarity of purpose that left no one in doubt as to who was now in charge. Marcus Thorne, who she had promoted to president and COO, stood by her side, a look of profound respect on his face. Later that day, she met with Alexander Sterling in her new office, the very office Damien had once occupied. It was already being transformed. The cold, minimalist furniture was being replaced with warmer, more functional pieces. The ostentatious modern art was gone, replaced with whiteboards covered in strategic diagrams. "A good first day, Miss Vance," Alexander said, leaning against the doorframe, a cup of coffee in his hand. "Please call me Catherine," she replied, looking up from a budget report. "Catherine," he acknowledged with a small smile. "The markets have responded well. The analysts are calling this the most elegant corporate takeover in a decade." "It wasn't about elegance," she said, her expression serious. "It was about correction, restoring balance." "Perhaps," he conceded, "but you can't deny there's a certain poetry to it." He looked at her, his usual predatory gaze softened by something else: admiration. "I've acquired dozens of companies in my career. It's usually a bloody, messy affair. But with you, it was like watching a surgeon at work. You didn't use a cudgel, you used a scalpel." Damien was the architect of his own downfall, Catherine said, unwilling to take full credit for his self-destruction. I simply pointed out the structural flaws to the demolition team. Alexander chuckled, a rare, genuine sound. A modest surgeon, then. I have a feeling this is going to be a very profitable partnership, Catherine. Their relationship remained strictly professional, yet a powerful current of mutual respect flowed between them. He valued her intellect, her foresight, her unwavering composure. She valued his decisiveness, his vast resources, and the fact that he never once underestimated her. He didn't see a woman. He saw a brilliant mind, a formidable ally. For Catherine, after a decade of being treated as an accessory, that respect was more valuable than any romance. That evening, she did not return to a hotel suite. She had purchased a beautiful brownstone in the West Village, a place with character and warmth, filled with books and art that she loved. It was hers, bought with the first payment from her new, staggering salary and signing bonus. As she unlocked her own front door, carrying a bag of groceries, a sense of profound peace washed over her. She wasn't just reclaiming her company, she was reclaiming her life, her name, her identity. The gilded cage was gone, its bars melted down and reforged into a key. The new dawn wasn't just for Sterling Blackwood. It was for Catherine Vance. And it was just beginning. 6 months passed. The transition at Sterling Blackwood was not just smooth, it was transformative. Under Catherine's strategic guidance and Marcus's operational management, the company flourished. She dismantled Damien's reckless projects, stabilized the company's finances, and fostered a new culture of genuine innovation. The flawed Prometheus AI was scrapped, and a new, more stable and powerful version, codenamed Phoenix, was already in development. Built on the solid foundation of her original architectural plans, the company's stock price didn't just recover, it reached unprecedented new heights. Catherine Vance became a legend in the business world. She was the subject of a glowing cover story in Forbes magazine titled The Architect: How Catherine Vance Rebuilt Her Empire. The article detailed her quiet but crucial role in the founding of Blackwood Innovations and her masterful strategy in seizing control. The accompanying photograph was of her in the new boardroom, poised and powerful, with Alexander Sterling looking on with clear admiration. She was no longer defined by her relationship with Damien. He was now a footnote in her story. Her relationship with Alexander had deepened into a formidable professional partnership and a quiet, budding friendship. They were intellectual equals who challenged and respected one another. There were hints of something more, shared dinners that lasted for hours, conversations that strayed from business to art, philosophy, and their pasts. But they were in no rush. For the first time in a long time, Catherine was building something for herself, on her own terms, and she was savoring every moment. One crisp autumn afternoon, Damien Blackwood sat alone at an outdoor cafe in a quiet, forgotten corner of Soho. His world had shrunk dramatically. The sycophants and hangers-on had vanished along with his CEO title. His invitations to galas and exclusive parties had dried up. He was a social pariah, a cautionary tale whispered about at the very events he once dominated. Serafina had never called. He'd seen her once, photographed on the arm of a much older, much richer European industrialist. She hadn't even given him a second glance. He was scrolling through the news on his phone when he saw it. The cover of Forbes. He stared at the image of Catherine, his Catherine, looking more regal and confident than he had ever seen her. He read the headline, The Architect. The word twisted in his gut. He read excerpts from the article, quotes from Marcus Thorne praising her vision, from industry analysts lauding her genius, from Alexander Sterling calling her his most valuable asset. There was a small, bitter paragraph about him, describing him as the ousted founder whose aggressive but reckless leadership had nearly ruined the company. He was the villain in her heroic tale. As he sat there, a wave of cold, hard clarity washed over him. He had never truly seen her. He had seen a wife, an assistant, a reflection of his own success. He had never seen the brilliant, formidable woman who had been standing beside him all along, holding up the pillars of his kingdom. The slap had not been a show of strength. It had been an act of catastrophic weakness, the desperate lashing out of an insecure man terrified of the power his wife quietly wielded. He looked up from his phone just as a black town car pulled up to the curb across the street. The rear door opened and Catherine stepped out, followed by Alexander Sterling. They were laughing about something, their heads close together. They were heading into a renowned art gallery. She looked radiant, energized, free. She didn't see him. He was invisible to her now, a ghost from a past life she had shed completely. He watched as Alexander held the gallery door open for her, the gesture one of casual, genuine respect. As she passed through the doorway, she turned and gave him a smile, not the practiced, polite smile she had worn for a decade as Mrs. Blackwood, but a real, brilliant smile that lit up her entire face. Damien felt a profound, aching emptiness that had nothing to do with money or status. It was the realization of what he had truly lost. He hadn't just lost a company. He had thrown away the one person who had seen greatness in him and had dedicated her own genius to making it a reality. He had shattered the most valuable thing he ever had, not with a single slap, but with 1,000 cuts of ego and neglect. He was left with his diminished fortune and his cavernous, empty penthouse. She had the company, the respect of her peers, and a future she was building for herself. The final reckoning was not a dramatic confrontation or a shouted argument. It was this, a quiet, undeniable truth settling upon him in a lonely cafe. He had slapped his wife to please his mistress, and the next day she had arrived with an army and calmly, methodically, taken back the world she had built, and he had no one to blame but himself. And so, Catherine Vance's story becomes a powerful lesson in value, respect, and the quiet strength that so many people underestimate. It's a reminder that the silent partner in the room is often the most powerful, and that true strength isn't about raising your voice or your hand, but about knowing your worth and having the courage to claim it. Damien Blackwood thought he was breaking his wife, but he only succeeded in breaking the chains that held back a titan. She didn't seek simple revenge. She sought reclamation, building a brighter future from the ashes of a painful past. What did you think of Catherine's incredible transformation? Was her boardroom takeover the ultimate power move? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by her story of resilience and empowerment, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength. And of course, for more compelling stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss what we have coming next. Thank you for listening.